Hey guys, today let's get a little messy. I'm Sadia.
I'm Lauren.
I'm Ian.
I'm Peter, and this is
Spaces. What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about something a little bit more serious. First of all, thank you for joining us. I'm so happy to see all of us here. Lauren is back. She was here last week. Peter is back. Finally.
Let's go.
We needed some stability here. Last week, you should have seen it.
They probably did.
I hope so. If
And
not,
that was
watch
edited.
last week's. That was edited. That was rough. But beside the point, we were talking about something a little more messy today. Ian, if you can kind of get the ball rolling a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to have a conversation about what do we do whenever we are in the places of stress. What do we do whenever we find ourselves in places of anxiety, whenever we realize that, you know what, we need to change? I don't know about y'all. I know us at the table, we've been talking about some, but I don't know about if you're listening to this right now. What are some of the, and maybe you can just think in your head right now, what are some of the feelings and emotions that the last few months have brought up within you? I don't know your situation, but we've all been facing COVID and the constant uncertainty about our health. Or maybe, I think a really big one right now is families being forced to deal with their issues, being together all the time.
Also being apart.
Sure,
Mm-hmm.
sure. You're going to talk more about that, right?
Yeah, later on though.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, absolutely.
Go ahead.
But the point is, right, being apart and then wondering, okay, are they going to be healthy or how are we going to connect there? So we're facing a time of a lot of stress, and that's besides politics, and that's besides all those other things that were already there within us. So something that I found within myself is having those extra moments, especially during quarantine, but even beyond that, just going out less. Having those moments of reflection often has brought me more of an awareness of the stuff in my life that I really need to work on. Of the things that in my life where I'm like, wow, that should not be there. What do I do about it? I need to change. Like something is wrong. You guys feel that? And today we want to have a conversation whenever we find ourselves in those moments. Maybe you're in a moment like that right now. What do we do? Like, how do we approach that in a way that is healthy, in a way that is in line with the way of Jesus? And with that, since Peter, you're back, I kind of want to ask you a question. Like, whenever we look at this conversation, this question of like, what do we do in these spaces, these messy spaces? Like, whenever we realize our need, like, do you have any comments about that, or how should we approach that?
Before that, can we talk a little bit more about the space? Because for people who don't know what that space is, I think it's very important to understand what that space is.
Yeah.
So basically what Ian is trying to say is that when we, especially faced with quarantine, we're in a house or wherever we are, we're faced with ourselves. And there's a lot of times when we're so busy, we're on the go. We're in America right now, so like everything is fast-paced, fast food, fast whatever. You can go to the movies and buy a ticket, see a movie, do whatever.
Sure.
You can go online, shop for something, and you can either have next day pickup or whatever. Everything's so fast-paced, but what happens when everything slows down and you have to sit with yourself, and that person that you're sitting with, you don't know, you don't recognize, or you don't like? So if
Such a good way to put it, yeah.
If you can elaborate a little bit more about that space and then what Ian was talking to you about. I know that was a lot.
Yeah, but yeah, I think you had identified something that's very powerful because it's something that we're not, as you said, because of the fast pace, we're not used to doing. I remember in a couple of years ago, in 2017, I had the opportunity to go and backpack the Arctic Trail, which is up in Greenland. And the reason why I was going to go is because I was looking for silence. I just wanted to quiet everything in my head heart, and just it was going to be kind of a retreat with me, and spend some time with God, and I went alone, and it was 10 days in the wilderness, and I got to tell you, out of the 10 days that I was in the wilderness, 8 were noisy in my head. I was seeking quiet. I was seeking to be present with myself, but the more I was trying to do that, the more noise I found. And every time we sit with ourselves, I think you identify it pretty well. We either like ourselves or we don't like ourselves, or we find ourselves conflicted with ourselves. Or we don't know that person that's right there, and it's kind of a surprise. And one of the things that brings us this type of scenario is crisis. Crisis sometimes invites us to be present. And the problem is that sometimes when we look at crisis, we always look at it in a negative way. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, when people see crisis, we always see the negative. Because when crisis hits, all the stuff surface. A good example of this is when I was a hospice chaplain. In hospice, you work with patients who have 6 months to a year to live, and it's a very sensitive process. The journey that they start walking in. But what I noticed as a chaplain is that suddenly things that were not talked about for 10 years, 30 years, 40 years, all of a sudden start showing up. And so at this moment of crisis, at this moment of difficulty, all this noise, if I can put it that way, all this noise would show up, and families would have a difficult time processing, and the patient in the midst of all this. What was surprising to me, though, that the families that for some reason they trusted the process and were present with the messiness and the noise that came about with this, suddenly healing took place. And suddenly this peacefulness in the midst of the journey happened. And I have no idea how to identify how it happened, when it happened. It just happened. But families that didn't know, that they just went into denial or tried to find some other thing to do, they didn't find that peaceful moment, and so the messiness that we're talking about, this crisis, this chaos, the Bible speaks about it, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, when the Spirit of God is hovering over the darkness and the chaos, right? The tohu bahu in Hebrew, right? And basically, the beauty of moments like this, it's that it's the perfect place for creation or new creation to happen.
Can you say that again?
Chaos is the perfect place for creation or new creation to happen.
Wow.
And that's what we're not aware. And my supervisor, when I was learning this whole discipline about being a chaplain, my supervisor used to tell me, there's a paradox, right? The more I push away the pain and the noise, the less I heal.
Wow.
The less I'm able to be present with myself, the less I'm able to be whole. The more I lean into the messiness, the pain, whatever it is, the dynamics that is, the more healing I find. And it's very difficult. It's not easy at all. It's very hard. And one of my personally, in 2009 when my mother passed away, even though I had all the this training about being a chaplain, how to be present, etc., it didn't apply to me at that moment.
Wow.
I got busy. I was doing a lot of things, so I didn't have a healthy process of grieving my mother's loss. You see, so it was later on that I started finding out that in different places, it was interesting because one of the things that you need to understand is that these messy places, these grief, these changes, they don't just go away.
What do you mean?
for example, there was this one lady I was having a conversation with, and after 38 years,
38.
After 38 years, she was able to finally connect again to her pain, and she felt it as the first day.
Mm.
But this time, by being present with it, she started finding healing.
Wow.
You see, and same thing. You know, it was interesting to me that after a year, in the most craziest of places, all of a sudden I was connecting with my pain. And you would find me crying in the most weird places, you know, like for example, I was asking for a slushie and all of a sudden I was crying right there. It had nothing to do with a slushie, but something there connected me to my mom, and I had a choice whether to be present with the messiness that was happening right there, right now, that nobody else was going to understand.
Yeah.
Or to walk away from it and ignore it. So I chose to be present with it, so therefore I was crying and people were like, okay, what's wrong with him? Is the slushie that good? You know?
Is it that bad?
Is it that bad? You know, so these moments of and I go back to what you said, Sadie. You described it pretty well. These moments where I find myself sitting in front of me and being present with me, they surprise us. They surprise us, and they're not always easy.
Wow. So you're saying that crisis is the context for, it can be the context for healing.
Yeah.
In other words, crisis comes with the opportunity to come out of that crisis different and with more life than we came into that crisis.
Yeah.
What gets in the way of that? Because maybe people have heard that before, but what gets in the way of us, like you said, leaning into the pain? Because, you know, that sounds like, okay, theoretically I just lean into that, but what does that really mean, and what gets in the way?
There's so many things that can get in the way. Look, you know, it can be from Netflix to reading a book to doing a project. I mean, there's so many things that we can utilize to just, you know, avoid that, you know. And we all have self-defense mechanisms that activate, you know, but they all look so different, and they show in different ways, you know. And you can probably choose to do something healthy, but that same thing that you're doing healthy is what you're utilizing to avoid being present with the pain or the messiness that's happening.
So you're saying good things can keep us from healing?
It can be good things, it can be bad things.
Can I take it a different way?
Sure.
From your question, sorry, I don't know what's going on with my voice. Anyways, your question was what can get in the way of leaning into it. I feel like a very, very big factor is the fear of being consumed by it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because grief is such a complicated thing. Like just talking on like the whole grief thing. And grief, there's such a shallow or very like not as deep meaning to grief, because people think it's mostly when somebody's died. But it's the loss of something. So it's the loss of a friendship. Like if you lose a friend, if you lose your dog, like not even that they died, they just ran away. The loss of a loved one, which is a very big one that a lot of people face. The loss of a relationship, it's the loss of something.
And I would like to add to that, not only a loss, it's any change.
Yes.
Gives grief. Any change.
Yes. But in the sense of feeling the pain, I feel like fear is a very big factor of why people don't lean into it, because a lot of times people lean into it so far into a, not necessarily a negative way, but it leads to the fact of they can't handle the steps that they need to take to where they let that pain consume them and override and take over that. And I've experienced it so many times to where the point is like I got to a point where I was sick and tired of being in pain, of grieving, because I've gone through so much in my life to where like I've grieved. Like, there's so much change throughout my life, and I know that there's a lot of times when I like to be busy, I like to do certain things. It's really hard for me to be vulnerable, and yet I still am very vulnerable. Like, I'm a very vulnerable person, but there's just some steps that I haven't been able to take and step into because of the fear of being absolutely consumed by what is going on in my head. Does that make sense? So that, yes, is like, oh, we can distract ourselves from those certain things, but on a more like broad spectrum fear, like the feeling of like scared, you're just terrified of what's going to happen, and even though all of that is good, in a sense, is you have to learn how to overcome the fear of being consumed so that you can take those steps. But how do we step past the fear into the unknown of leaning into our pain?
That's a good question. Because what you're talking about is coping mechanisms. That's basically, what kind of coping mechanisms do we have? And truly to say, there's a possibility that the majority of us, we don't have coping mechanisms like detailed and systematic of this is how I'm going to do it. We might have some coping mechanisms, we're just not aware of it, that we have these coping mechanisms. But basically, you present something very important, because it's very scary to dive in, because the pain is so unbearable, or the change is so big. It feels like it's gut-wrenching, and you feel paralyzed completely. Like, grief is so serious, that it can, you can wake up one day tired and not move from your bed for the next 3 days. This is a reality. This is, people experience this.
I remember you had a conversation with me, Peter, where you said, so I was coming off of really what was it was honestly the hardest season of my life, and I was feelings that I had never felt before. I felt so overwhelmed, and Sadie, I so relate with what you were saying with busyness, because that's how I dealt with it. Is I just threw myself into, okay, the past is past, so now, that whole thing, like, past in the past, leave the past in the past, let's move forward. So I really tried to move forward, and like doing things constantly, to the point that it was, looking back as I reflect, it was in order for me not to feel. And I remember you had a conversation with me. You had a conversation with me in which you were inviting me to sit with what I was really going through, and to stop projecting, but you invited me to sit with it. And the point of that was that, man, actually, it's funny, because even as I'm sharing this, some of those feelings come back up. Even though this is something that I have sat with, those feelings still come up. But you told me that it comes with a cost. That whatever that this diving in, it comes with a cost. That's what that was my point. That choosing healing isn't just a positive experience, but it actually does come with that trade-off, which is we feel a lot. It's strong. It can be scary.
And it's deep, but it's meaningful. It's a powerful thing, and the question is, how do we do that? How do we dive in? And I want to, before we talk about diving in. I want to present a tension, though. I went through 2 residencies in what we call clinical pastoral education, and basically, it was a very difficult process, because it's, the training, it's inviting you to be present, and inviting you to be present with your pain, and it stirs up all these emotions and stuff like that. So it's very difficult. And I remember after I finished my 2 residencies, and I had done some years in chaplaincy, I was going into church planting, and I told a friend of mine, and I said, do you remember The Matrix? that movie Matrix. I don't know, there's some younger generation, but
I'm glad you pointed. We're the same age.
Yeah. You guys are. If you guys are familiar with the Matrix, it's a pretty nifty movie that came up in a certain moment. It was like, wow, what amazing. But the thing about the Matrix is there's this moment where Morpheus is sitting right in front of this guy. I forgot the name of the other guy, and he's no. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong scene. The scene is there's the guy who wants to betray the whole group, and he's meeting with the guys of the Matrix, right? And he's sitting at a table there, and in front of him there's a steak. And he knows, because he's outside of the Matrix now, he knows that this is fake. This is not really a steak. And the meal, but he looks at it, looks juicy, and he wants it to be real. And so he's betraying because he wants to get back into the Matrix so he can feel that this is real again. And he eats, and at that point he just chews into his steak. And it's like eating it like this is steak, it tastes so good. And so what I'm trying to say is that I was telling my friend, I feel that way. To be present with your pain constantly is so difficult. And there's you need to understand that there's sometimes I just need to be busy. Sometimes I just want to bite into the steak and ignore everything that ever existed,
Yeah.
And sometimes I can come back and sit with my pain and be present with it and go through the process of healing. And some people, when we talk about that, of sitting, being present with yourself, it doesn't mean that, you're going to dive in it, because sometimes it's unbearable. And you just need to paint a house, or you just need to spend some time with friends, or you need, you buy something, or do a haircut, or go get a massage, just get your head out of it,
Sure.
completely. And so that's where the coping mechanisms go in, because what you're talking about is how do we lean into this fear and this pain
without it overwhelming us.
without being overwhelming us, without overwhelming us, and we need to choose what kind of bite size we can do.
Yeah.
And it's okay to step back and do your thing, watch your Netflix thing, or do some reading. I really advocate that we do things more healthy, right?
Sure. Because I just want ice cream.
Yeah. But
I want ice cream right now.
You just do that thing.
Even as we're talking about this.
But on the other hand, what emerges from you when you sit in this place is this new person. And I say new person in a sense that you just there's a newness to you. There's this wholesome newness to you that you're like, you feel brave, you feel courage, and you can face the world. And you're vulnerable. And I want to go back to what Brené Brown says. Because Brené Brown, when all her studies and so on, one of the first things she said is, people who are vulnerable are the happiest people. And I got to tell you, when you go through that process, when you lean in, you start experiencing that healing. You're vulnerable, but you're so happy. There's a certain joy. I mean, your happiness and your joy, it doesn't mean absence of conflict or absence of the grief or absence of difficult places. It's just there's something in it that just it's so good. It's here I am, and I want to take opportunity of this, and I want to make the best I can, kind of thing. That's a very simplistic way of describing it.
Lauren, what are some of the things that come to your mind with this soul journey?
Something that Peter said was like the whole term of newness, wholesomeness, and like that's just such a big term, like with the teens nowadays, like, oh, you're so wholesome, this is wholesome, And I think this whole pandemic has kind of put everybody through a stage of grief, either through the loss of a job or like, anything, or like the loss of time with family and friends that they wish they spent more time with, like it's just really sad to think about, but it's something that does have to happen, like especially with the new year, not like at the beginning, like January, but like with fall approaching. I know some people are starting school, just having new experiences, and it's just really scary to think about. I thought about something that you said today, or no, No, it was something that you said. We were talking about an interview, and there's this question that really scares people, like with the thought of adapting to change, because like you said before, the world has always been so busy, like hustle bustle. Like I feel like the world and society is kind of mimicking an ocean right now. Like, it's busy with the waves, and when everything settles, you don't like what you see when everything slows down, so you have to sit with that image of yourself. And there's this question that scares me in interviews. It's, where do you see yourself in a year, 5 years? And I think that's the thing that scares people the most, is because there's that uncertainty, what are we going to do to pass time? And that's where those coping mechanisms, healthy or unhealthy, that comes in. Sorry, I'm losing my saliva. But yeah, I just thought about that, and there's just so many things that I wish that we could have done as a group, or like personally, to be better, like the betterment, to achieve that newness, that wholesomeness that people do really crave, during this time.
It's interesting that you're talking about that, because Lauren, I went to business school, and that's like, we talk about that all the time. Like,
Yeah.
how can you like actualize yourself? Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Like, how can I reach the top of the pyramid where I'm like this like amazing like business demigod? Like we worship like guys like Jeff Bezos, and like these guys are like they take names, and they kick butt for the purpose of keeping this podcast clean, and they're just these awesome, no vulnerability. And how we grow by learning these skills. We learn by we grow by learning these techniques and all these things, right? Something that I found in my life, though, is that achieving that growth, or because I would think about that a lot. It's like, who am I going to be in 5 years? And so I would make a plan. So I'm gonna achieve this. I'm gonna achieve this. It was all exterior. It was all, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. It was this plan of how I was going to, for me, I wanted to be like this, like, famous speaker. And so I was like, okay, so in 1 year I'm going to do this, and then the next step I'm going to do this, and then by the end of the college, hopefully I will be in a play. Like that was kind of the plan. Something that I found in my life now, being a little bit older and a little less idealistic, is that the most growth that I've experienced in my life did not come from the exterior things, but it came through the journey. It came by actually doing those things that seem counterproductive. It seems, right, it can seem counterproductive to take a look within yourself. It can seem counterproductive to, like we're talking about, some of these things are so painful, they can make us less efficient and less, less put together, right? Less like, I'm no longer Iron Man anymore. I'm no longer the superhero leader. We love the leaders that are just like superheroes, hard charging, no vulnerabilities. But it's actually when I've let go of that ideal, and I've took Peter's challenge of sitting with my pain, that I've discovered the most growth within. And that has led to everything else. That has led to a change within me, has led to a change of the things around me. If that makes sense.
So it's kind of helped you learn more about yourself, and then to branch off that new idea that sparks new beginnings, kind of, in a way.
Well, the character, one way I've heard it put is kind of character paves the way for you. Like, who you are, like, will pave the way. Like if you truly are a person of integrity, a person of authenticity, you don't have to fake it anymore. You can show up and be real. You don't have to worry that you're going to be exposed by a certain stage, or that a moment will be too big for you, because you've taken the time when no one was watching to do the hard things. You've taken the time to not worry so much about what other people think, and actually do the hard work of becoming someone great. Not just, that's it. Not just trying to be someone that people think is great, but actually becoming someone great. Someone great because they're full of love and realness. And man, Peter, you're one of those people. You're one of those people that I gotta throw some love on you, because I know that you are that safe space. I know some people only know you by what you say on stage and what you would say like that, but your character is someone that has created a space for me to be vulnerable, has created a space for me for growth. And, you know, in my eyes, I don't care what you end up achieving, different things. You have, you know, so, you know, it's so, like, you can do all those things and you can speak, but I don't think you're great because of what you achieve. I think you're great because of who you are and how you've impacted my life.
Dang, that should be a birthday
Thank
card.
you.
That sounds really, that's really nice.
Hallmark, where are you at?
Yeah.
Hallmark who?
And just
That's
honestly, because I think it ties in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I one of the beauties of taking the opportunity to sit, to be present with yourself, and to be in that place of messiness, and to face the fear and go into that pain sometimes, is you know, this transformation that happens in our life, you know. And I think one of the transformation parts of this, one of the transformational parts, there's a lot of things to talk about this, but one of the transformational parts is the fact that you realize that there are beautiful things and there are imperfections in your life, and that's okay. And I go back to, I think I shared this in one of our podcasts. I read a book written by one of the founders of AA, and he writes one of his initial paragraphs in the book is, my favorite game is baseball because it's the only game that includes errors as part of the game. And so when you know, and let's bring this into the religious context, the Christians, the spiritual context, you know, because the problem is a lot of us, we don't go to this place because we deem it negative. We don't go to this place because we say it's sinful, or, you know, we're not good enough, or God is punishing, or something is going on, etc. And even you look into the Bible, there's a lot of biblical characters that had this moment where they had to sit with themselves and be present. You know, one of them is Elijah. Elijah's sitting in the cave. You know, what happened? I was leading the biggest revival ever, you know, and now I'm being pursued, and you know, I'm going to be killed, and what's going on, God? You know, what happened? I'm the only one serving you. And then God shows all these different scenarios, and at the end of the day, you know, Elijah becomes aware that he's not the only one, that there's 7,000 more, and you know, what God is saying, you know, your plan, it's not your plan, it's my plan. It's not the way it's the way I'm doing it for you, the way I'm working it through you. And so we need those caves to become aware of God's presence and God's intervention in our life, you know. And that's why I think David, you know, does a very incredible work when he says, he writes, even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thy staff and thy rod, they comfort me.
Psalm 23.
Yeah, even though you're going to go through them, even though, you know, we need them, because when we are in these places, we become more aware and more in tune with God's presence of what he's doing in our life and how he's working it out, even if we don't understand everything.
That's true.
You're saying that without the valleys, maybe we could go our entire lives not realizing, I think there's two sides of it. Not realizing our true brokenness, but also not realizing our true beauty.
Exactly. Well put.
So
this is by the way, this topic is very hard for these folks right here.
yeah,
it's a very difficult topic, and that's why it's difficult to say something.
Sure.
But I got to tell you, there's joy. There's joy. You know, I remember when I was a teenager, I fell in love with this one girl, and it was one of these puppy loves moments. You know, this die hard. You know, I'm in love. You know, kind of deal thing.
Ooh, just like that.
And then it was not, it was not
Reciprocated.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
Heartbreaking.
Reciprocate. So it was heartbreaking. You know, it was like, rejected. You know, kind of deal
I
thing.
know the feeling.
You know, as a
Oh.
teenager, it was like, I'm no good for nothing. You know,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And suddenly, I remember. I cried. I remember I cried for like 2 days. I was so sad. How is it possible?
I know,
But
you're
then-
so good looking, man.
Then, whatever. But then,
Stay tuned next
then
time.
stay tuned. But you know what happened? What was beautiful was that, you know, I connected with my friends and I found this joy. I became this awareness that, wait, I'm not alone. I have all these friends. This is a beautiful community. I love being here. And it was just joyful. And I was able to look at this person as, cool, that's okay. Let's keep on walking the journey, you know, kind of deal thing. We are beautiful. God made us beautiful with every single issues we have, and with all the challenges, with all the beauties, with all the imperfections. We are beautiful people in the eyes of God, and we're beautiful people in the eyes of each other if we take time to pause and see.
Isn't there's a verse somewhere, I don't remember exactly where, but it's basically saying he knew who we were before we were made. Basically.
Psalm 139. Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. I know the Bible somewhat. Anyways, but yeah, and that, I think that speaks a lot, because people think that they have to get to a certain place to receive God's love, or to receive that, like, that just overwhelming, unconditional, the literally lack of a better word is love.
Yeah.
But the thing is that God knew us in all of the imperfections, all of the challenges that we were going to face, all of everything that who we are in our lowest, through those valleys, and he still made us. He still loves us. That we don't have, like, he meets us in the mess
Yes.
of who we are. He meets us where we are. He doesn't expect us to come up to where he is, because nobody could ever reach that height. But that's a little snippet of that.
But with what you're saying, I think it's interesting because maybe someone's listening right now and they're kind of thinking like, okay, that sounds nice, but where's that in the Bible? You know, like, because I see a lot of things like, oh, you know, you got to be perfect, or oh, you know, this is like, that's the way that some people have learned the Bible. You know, like if we're being honest, like, you got to do this. Like some people have learned the Bible that, like, God will not return. In other words, Jesus will not fulfill his promise of the second coming. And that's, you know, some insider language, but Jesus coming back to make the world right until there is like a perfect generation of people. Like, there are some people that believe that, like, we have to be perfect in order for God to do his deal. And it's like, okay,
That will never.
where's
be
that
the
in
way.
scripture? Because
Yeah.
one thing that I'm not gonna lie, I just finished Hebrew, and I finished 2 classes of Hebrew, so I'm feeling pretty good, and I haven't forgotten it yet, so I'm gonna mention something about Hebrew.
Feeling pretty good.
Is something that I've been seeing in the original text. So Hebrew, right, the original language of the Old Testament. Our professor's been breaking it down, and I've just been seeing like a different picture of God. It's like, I thought, like, I think a lot of people have the concept that like Old Testament God is like different than like Jesus, because Jesus is like more zen, and Old Testament God's like all like weird and like judgmental. Something that I've been seeing is like, when we actually dig into this, God is so much more beautiful, so much more real, so much more like, God is, in Peter's language, the one who meets us in the mess. Like, and like Peter, like you referred to, you mentioned Elijah. I think about Abraham. Abraham was so messy, and our professor's been breaking it down. Like, this guy was mad messy, and you know, he mentioned that so many times we think that like Christian life is like an upward journey, and if you can't see my hand, I'm going like upward with my hand, you know, like, you know, so we think like, okay, so the way God works is he meets someone and he's like, hey, I forgive your sins, follow me. So then the rest of their life, they're getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, until boom, they're just like rolling with Jesus. And that's what it looks like. That is not Abraham's story. Abraham's story is like this guy that is taken from a context of worshiping other gods and things like for several years. I think it was like 90 years before like God reveals himself to him. So the several years he's had his whole life, like type of deal, like way older than us. He's like
He's pretty set in his.
He's pretty
routine.
set in his ways, and Jesus and Yahweh, the God's personal name, meets him there, and it's like, okay, interesting. So it's like, okay, now it's gonna get better, right? Well, God makes his promises to Abraham and all these things like that, and you see in Abraham's life, this guy, for all his good moments where he trusts God, and the New Testament says that his faith was counted to him as righteousness. In other words, he was made right before God because he believed God's promise. For all of those moments, there's like 2 like really bad moments, or actually probably more than that. It's up and down to the point that rather than meeting our Christian expectation that everything was going to get better, what actually happens at the end of his life, we see interesting picture here. He has multiple wives, he had multiple children, and dysfunctional family, and kicked out his oldest son, and then at the end of his life, it's like, okay, and he went to be with his fathers, and that's it. And it's like, interesting. Yet God, in other parts of Scripture, says, this guy was my friend. What the? Like, what is that? How does that make sense? That makes no sense in our like Western Christian like perfection obsessed culture. Like, how does that happen? God is so good that he looks at the whole. He does not judge us by our worst moment. He looks at us and he's like, that's my friend. Because why? Because Abraham, even in the ups and downs, he would always go back to God. They had a friendship. They had a relationship. And God is so much better than we ever imagined. I'm just like, what the heck?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
How do we, in light of what you're saying, how do we do that? How do we lean into the fear and sit with our pain?
I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not sure. Dude, you look straight at me. I'm just telling you right now, I've been dealing with some pain. Like, my mom passed away 2 years ago, and I'm still dealing with that pain. I have those moments, those slushy moments of like, I'll just burst out in tears and like, why the heck am I crying? Is it my time? Or like, am I dying? What's going on? Like,
yeah.
And there's times of like, I sit in my room and I don't want to be by myself because I dislike what I look at. And it's just the sense of like, it's what you were saying, is you take it moment by moment of what you're comfortable with and what you need to know yourself, because it's going to take me a long time to get over certain things, or to be able to sit with those things.
Sure.
Because it's not, I think people think that they're taking those things in and like, oh, everything's gonna be dandy, whatever, but even as you were saying, like, those feelings come back. Like, I look at some pictures and I can like taste or smell like the sensual things, like taste, smell. I know what I felt in that very moment, and those feelings don't ever go away. But you change in the fact to where you become stronger and you can withstand the pain. So you take it with what you are comfortable with. Just on that, like, just disclaimer, none of us here are perfect. Like, we're all, he said that we're all, like, this is a very difficult discussion to have between us, because we know, like, each other's stories to a certain standpoint, but the thing is that we're all still struggling with pain.
Sure. We're
all still, like, having problems leaning into what may consume us and what we may have problems with. Because we are not perfect. We sit here and we talk, but we made this podcast specifically to talk about discussions like this that we even have trouble with. Because these are discussions that nobody else has, or nobody else wants to have, because it's a pain in the butt. Like, it hurts on the inside.
That reminds me of something Brene Brown talks about. She talks about how so many times we want joy and happiness, peace. And we think that we'll get to those places by talking about joy, happiness, and peace. But she says that the way to those places is not by talking about that, but by talking about the things that get in the way. And I think following Jesus is a lot like that sometimes. We can ask Jesus for peace all day long, but there are some things that God does, and there's other things that we do, and we have to invite him into. God is a gentleman. God will not go into the places unless we invite him. He can be knocking, he can be sending us invitations, but unless we accept it, we can live years stuck in a prison of our own making.
Well, for those who feel comfortable, I would suggest read the Psalms, because the Psalms are that. The Psalms are a bunch of people who have gone through different changes, different losses, and so on, and they write about it, and they express their feeling and so on. They not only express their knowledge of God, but they express their feeling. There's feeling behind it, but what I'm hearing here is, first of all, I'm hearing from Leon that
From Leon.
from Ian.
Hey, Leon.
Hey, Ian.
Hey.
I'm hearing from Ian that we the point of departure is that God understands when we have our dark moments, and he can walk with us there. And the other part is that leaning into the pain, being present with it, looks differently for everybody, and it's a different dynamic. So there's not this little piece of kind of pill that we can give you to say, hey, this is the way to
There's
do
no
it.
magic bullet.
There's no magic bullet, but one thing that we know,
Silver
People
bullet.
are saying this.
yeah,
There it is.
There's no one way to do it.
there's
There it
no
is.
one
Y'all
way to
are
do it.
making all these analogies.
But basically, one thing we do know is that if you have the opportunity, little by little, be present with your messiness.
One way that I do want to share, just to be practical, if anyone really wants to take the practicality. So Peter suggested reading the Psalms. That's amazing. I can tell you that, very helpful. Another thing that has really helped me in my life is taking the time to write down some of the feelings that I have as a result of things going on in my life. And so it's whether it's grief or anger, sadness, giving myself permission to write whatever I'm feeling. It's essentially, it's Brene Brown calls it the SFD, but we'll call it the messy first draft. And it is where we give ourselves permission to just write what we're really feeling. So, and with that, taking what we write down and taking it to God, kind of like writing our own psalm in a way. And that's kind of a picture of the Psalms. It's not only just reading the Psalms, but then taking the time to write something and then present it to God in prayer. Even if it's really messy, God can handle it. God can handle that. And then a great step as well with that is going to a trusted friend. I have my people. One of those people is Peter, that I can talk to with those really difficult things. And talking to them, asking them to pray for you, asking them to just listen and journey with you through that. So that's something that can be helpful.
I mean, even writing stuff down is very, very helpful, because sometimes in your head,
Ooh.
you cannot sort out your thoughts. It's just one of those things. Like your trip where you said those 8 days, it was just nothing but noise. I feel that every single day of my life. Like, it's those things, like, especially, and I think I mentioned it, I may have mentioned it in a Bible study, I may not have mentioned it in a podcast, but before my mom passed away, I was able to be very vulnerable with myself, with others, and with God. But after my mom passed away, I blocked off my heart to people, and my mind got very, very cluttered. It got very cluttered to where the fact that, like, I just had to write stuff down. And sometimes, like, let me be completely honest with you, that rough first draft, like the messy first draft, is so important, because you can write stuff just coming out, like it could be word vomit, like just coming out of your mouth, and you go back and you take 2 weeks, you look back at it, and it'll make complete sense to you. Like, it makes no sense to you at the beginning.
Sure.
But it'll make complete sense to you after those 2 weeks. Like, you'll be like, dang, I wrote this? Like, what was that? What was going on?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But after that certain amount of time, you come back and you look at it, and you look at it from a new perspective. You're a different person than you were 2 weeks ago. So you look at it, it's like having a friend look at your like paper, like
Sure.
reading your paper, except for you're your own friend,
Sure.
basically. So my whole point is, don't be afraid to write nonsense, because
Yes.
sometimes you don't know what you're feeling. Like, and me being like bipolar or whatever, like it's one of those things where you just feel and you have absolutely no
Yeah.
idea what you're feeling.
Yeah,
You're just
I
like,
feel that.
why am I angry? Like, why am I angry? All I did was drop my cookie, which is sad, but I shouldn't be crying over it,
Sure.
or I shouldn't be like angry, so just don't be afraid to have an uncertainty about your feelings. Just little nugget there.
So what do you do?
What do?
I work at Starbucks.
No, I actually do that activity where I write. I actually kept a journal for a whole year, and I wrote down my feelings through high school because I was going through an emotional roller coaster with new things and meeting new people and everything. But yeah, and then I looked back at it actually 2 weeks ago, and I saw how much growth, how much I've changed as a person, and how God has walked with me through this whole journey. And it just proves the point that you don't have to be perfect to meet God. He meets you in the imperfect, in the mess. And I mean, God even used the most unperfect, the messiest people in the Bible to make examples that show He's working in your lives and in everybody's lives. It's hard to see at the moment, but it does sometimes take the messy for you to really just calm down and realize that He's doing something amazing in your life. And just I really do suggest the journaling thing. Also, even like drawing, seeing, sometimes people can't find the words, but maybe through images too. I usually try to pick up a new hobby. I'm trying to pick up a new instrument to add to my list, and that's something that I want to do.
What are you picking up?
I'm trying to pick up this is gonna sound weird, the spoons, because Sadia okay, I don't know if
I
that
play the
counts.
spoons,
Yeah,
guys.
Sadia, she always talks about how she can play the spoons. I'm like, you know what?
I'll teach
She
you
can
how to
do
play
it.
the spoons.
I'm gonna try to do it too. No, I gotta learn this on my own. But
So just learning
she's
a new
just
hobby.
taught me how to
new
knit.
hobbies.
She taught me how to knit.
Yeah, I did
Honestly,
teach how to knit.
It's super relaxing. I
I'm
feel like
knitting
an
a
old
scarf
lady,
right now.
but
Yeah.
it's good picking up new hobbies. It gives you that time to clear your mind. With being busy, having the anchor there to anchor and weigh you down so that you don't get lost, basically. And that can be taken in a whole different ways, but basically just keeping you anchored to reality so that you don't be consumed by your ever flowing thoughts and clutter and mess, basically. So I mean, that's a great way to do things as well. Usually don't pick up a bad hobby, or we don't encourage bad things here, but
Sure.
but picking up new hobbies is a very good way to do certain things.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
The spoons.
Yeah.
Y'all, thank you so much for listening. As we
May I suggest before we close, since we're talking about this difficult topic, I don't know if someone out there is going through something, or if this has triggered something, in your heart and your thought, can we have a small little prayer, for you who are listening to us, and for each one of
That's exactly what I was gonna say, actually.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
please
That's
feel
perfect.
free. We post this on different platforms, and please feel free to comment or message our Instagram page directly, or anything. If you need prayer, if you have struggles, we're all there. We're all here. Utilize us if you need something, please.
Direct message. Can you project? Yeah.
Can you create project? CCP. Anyways, yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for everyone who has listened to this podcast. I thank you for their lives. I thank you for your presence with them, whether they realize it or not. I thank you that as your word says, you're the God who sees, and that you see them. You have seen them in their worst moments, and you see them in their best moments. You see them in the places of pain. You know what they're experiencing right now. You know what we're experiencing at this table. Lord, I just want to pray a blessing over every person hearing my voice right now. I want to pray a blessing that they, through your Holy Spirit, through your presence, would have the courage to go to the places of pain, and that you would help them navigate that as they take a small step of faith to go to those difficult places, that you would meet them there, and that you would provide a healing that they could never do on their own. Thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much for joining us and watching. Please feel free to reach out if you need it. But anyways, this is Spaces out. Outie.